guess I could start with the introductions. I'm Rachel DeGuzman, producer of engagement programs here at Geva Theater Center. This is our fifth Geva Insights. We started this for the 49th season. The first was for the play Constellations. We had Dr. Adam Frank. The second one was for How to Catch Creation. We had Annette Daniels-Taylor. The third was for Somewhere Over the Border. We had Tanya De Maglon. And then for the Chinese lady, we had Dr. Ilya Zhang. And now for the yoga play, we have Reverend Imani Olear. I'm so pleased to have her here. She's the founder of Yoga for a Good Hood, among many other things. When I was thinking about who would provide context or add different dimensions to the conversation, I have another program that I produce, the Geva pre-recorded prologue, which I did with Cindy Weiss. And that was something that we did from a different perspective, you know, of her having a yoga business too. And Imani has a yoga business with a community-rooted mission. And so before we start talking about what you do and, you know, your experiences with Yoga for a Good Hood, I do want to acknowledge that you just came here from Buffalo, straight from Buffalo today.
Yes, that's correct. And what I shared with my sister here, Rachel, is that before I speak, I'd like to acknowledge my ancestors, those that have gone before me. And so my mother, Connie, I bring her here with me, as well as her mother, Marian. And Marian's mother is Carrie, and her mother is Lucy. On my father's side, on the lineage of women, it is Luetta, and from Luetta is Emma, as well as Susie, who made a difference and was also a slave. And for Lula and Mariah, who all were a part of the diaspora, I call them here for me today to get me grounded. Not only as a yoga teacher do I need that grounding, but I need that grounding of my ancestors, particularly with the trauma that has been happening across the country, but more recently with the shooter in Buffalo. Usually what ends up happening, not only for Yoga for a Good Hood, she also noted that I'm also a pastor. I work in the Lutheran church and work with leaders, and I was called to Buffalo to provide some grounding as well as comfort for those victims and the families and that community as a whole. So when I walked in, I just needed to take a breath. So it was nice to see the actors actively doing that breathe in and breathe out to not only calm my parasympathetic nervous system, but just a reminder that we can always do that.
And that's something that you do on an ongoing basis, but I really, you know, we saw how this Jujimon company started. How did you start in yoga, and then carry us forward to how you decided to start Yoga for a Good Hood, to found it?
So I mentioned my grandmother, Luetta Jean. When I was around about 11 years old, I found a book by BKS Iyengar. Now, I didn't know what all the words were with BKS Iyengar, but I was fascinated by the shapes. I was also fascinated about when I did certain things, my levels of anxiety lessened. It just was. My grandmother told me that I wasn't allowed to do that. That was of the devil. That's a cultural thing. And so I hid it for years. And so flash towards in my 20s when my son's father was murdered, I had to go back to my breath. After different traumas in my own life, several times I went back to my breath. And so I thought in my, I guess it was 40s, I decided to become an official yoga teacher after particularly meeting a woman named Berta who was a heroin addict and she needed her breath. So I thought it would be appropriate to give that back to my community. And so Yoga for a Good Hood was birthed out of a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and telling her to breathe in between bites.
And I guess I would love to talk about the connection, because you mentioned your grandmother who thought, that it was the devil, the devil's worship.
Yes.
But then you connected the Christian faith to yoga. So how does that work? I'm sure you don't take one hat off when you're a pastor and put another on when you're teaching people to breathe.
No, I'm a whole person, and I show up just the way I am every time. And I believe that, and I think I can say this as a pastor, that we have misrepresented what Christianity or any of our faiths should be. And so the principle of ahimsa that comes out of yoga is something that we should be looking at, nonviolence. When we look at what is happening around the world with white supremacy at its rise, the violence that is increasing, we as, let's say, as Christians, or just being a human being, right, should practice taking a breath and beginning to see each other, and like really seeing each other. And these, and then maybe then we can see ourselves as well.
Connecting with the play.
Connecting with the play.
What are some of the things, I guess the top thing that really resonated with you about something we should, that just was resonant with you? I know we talked about when the end of the first act, when the guru ended up being white. And that was something that you thought might happen. And so why?
Because we've appropriated pretty much everything that we can here. And we do that often. And we always, now, I will say, just because of my playwriting days back, there's always a good plot twist that is needed. But there has been a lot of appropriation that we have done of a culture, and we have made it a fashion statement. I also was a brand ambassador, well, technically still am a brand ambassador for Lululemon, which ironically the name kind of plays on. But one of the things in which I said to Lululemon in the years in which I've worked with them is that how can we begin to make things accessible for everyone? And so when the lead actress, Joan was her name, when Joan was saying, we gotta make a size 12, right? For me, my conversation with Lululemon is, how do we make something accessible? Because wellness is a civil right. It should not be something that should only be for someone that can afford a $100 pair of pants or a $200 pair of pants. It shouldn't always look a certain package, right? It doesn't have to be sexy. It can also walk with a limp like I do. I've had a hip replacement. I had lupus. I've struggled with my body. I've struggled through my own trauma. This should be accessible to everyone. And so that's why that resonated with me, right? Like this play in its own way. And I think that we mistake the package, that the package and the message, we should also see that it can come in different ways.
I thought the guru was interesting.
You?
He was interesting in a couple ways, in that of everyone in the play, he seemed to embrace at least the yoga from a spiritual perspective. But then he also had the problem where he was appropriating an accent to do so. So it's like, it was a very complicated thing. It made what could have been something that, maybe it was an authentic journey for him, questionable.
Well, I think all of our, we live in intersections, always. And I can't judge anyone's authenticity. But what I do know is that yoga has changed my life, and I have seen how it has changed others. Baba Ram Das, who is no longer on this plane with us, says that we're always walking each other home. That's the goal. And so I think that with the guru that came from the high and low Himalayas, as they said, is embodying that. Now, I can't speak to, I think we'd be here all night if we start talking about appropriation in many ways, but there are lines of truth that we can all lend to that I think is very important that can translate for us all.
How have you seen the accessibility that you've helped create in yoga in your community? How have you seen it in our community have impact?
We have, for Yoga for a Good Hood, we are now creating a hybrid model with True Yoga Studio, which I'm also the owner of becoming this social entrepreneur. And how can we make yoga accessible and spread it for more people? So we offer scholarships to people. We offer teacher training based on, so I've taken several teacher trainings, and let's just say that the median price for a teacher training is $3,000. The average person cannot afford that. And so we try to make that accessible. We have done 5 teacher trainings through Yoga for a Good Hood. We have graduated on average about anywhere from 15 to 30 people in each of those classes. Over 60% of those persons have paid little to no more than $1,000 for this training, so that they are now changing the landscape of yoga, right? It is persons like Diamond who came from, she was 43% the poverty level when she came here, and now she can make a living, she can make a wage, right? We can also see black and brown bodies in front of us that maybe we didn't see each other before. It has been it was very hard for me in teacher training as a black woman that isn't very bendy, or told that my body is supposed to fit into a certain narrative. But at Yoga for a Good Hood and at True, we don't say that. You just come in, do your thing. Because that's what community should be about. It's about accepting people right where they are.
So I want to shift to the spiritual aspect of yoga and how critical it is with, we've had multiple pandemics, but at least 2 that have been ever present for a couple of years here in Rochester. And there's mental health crisis that we're in for, COVID, for police brutality, the racial reckoning, that we're all those things we're experiencing. The fact that some people are experiencing great wealth during this pandemic and other people extreme poverty. Mm-hmm. And so I want to talk about, with Yoga for a Good Hood, what's the spiritual opportunities that people have who connect. So certainly, because I want to talk about wellness from a perspective that's not just physical.
Right. Well, what the guru and the actor person said, that the Atman is our truest self. And one of the things that we try to tap into with Yoga for a Good Hood, or at least from my perspective, is the hood in our name stands for healing ourselves through Oms and downward dogs, right? Discovering what is essential and what is missing in our own self. Like, we heal ourselves, and we heal ourselves in community. We don't need an outside guru to tell anyone anything. I am just a guide on the side, right? And I am guru language, even when people say, oh, pastor, whatever, Jesus left in front of me, or whatever they do, right? It makes me really turn to them and say, you do know everything you need is right inside of you. And we have lost that. We have lost that in ourselves because I am a part of a great lineage, right? Everything, and also their traumas, right? If we look at post-traumatic slave syndrome, or any traumas that any of us have experienced, and so if there's a post-traumatic slave syndrome, there must be a post-traumatic slave owner syndrome, but that's a different topic. But if we had all experienced traumas, and we begin to tap into our bodies, like he was saying, like, tap in, we can begin to see some really valuable lessons, right? The things that are in our DNA, the things that we are really struggling with. And so for me, the spiritual aspect is beginning to see that we are beautiful, that we are good, that there is nothing wrong with us, no matter how we're showing up. So I tell people all the time, look, I got a limp, I got a bad hip, I need another new hip, all the things, and I'm doing the yoga. But the yoga is really about self-reflection. It is really about knowing when my breath is out of control and why. And then, however we see spirit or however we see connection, that we begin to heal. That's the spiritual part. And I just want that for my community. I want my community to see their beauty. I want every woman who has experienced abuse. Part of my work is also historically with Livonia now. It used to be called Great Crisis Center. But going into the hospital room with a woman that has been assaulted and saying, baby, we can breathe through this. And then we will just take the next step. It's right there inside of you.
I thought the play did a good job of showing how when you come from the most inauthentic place, which I would say don't do,
Yeah.
how it really ate her up too. You know, and I think that's, so I want to talk a little bit about what this authenticity means to you. Because you said you can't judge another person's authenticity, and I think it's almost like racial identity. How do you, and that came up in here too, how do you judge how another person identifies racially? Even though you don't judge them, there are repercussions to, like a Rachel Dolezal, who was referenced to the play,
Yes.
who led the NAACP.
Yes.
But I think that authenticity is complicated, and when you talk about us being connected to who we are inside our truest self, is that the epitome of authenticity? And and is that something? So is that why you can't judge another person because we really connect with our authentic selves? That's really the most important part of it.
There's a lot to unpack there. So let me just take a moment. For me, being authentic means that I can be messy. I can be honest. I can be transparent. And so I find it difficult to say you're being inauthentic because I don't know all your mess unless we're in a different relationship. When I build a relationship, let's say with my sister Serena, who's here. Serena and I have built relationships that break down the barriers so I know when she's being fake. I could say, sis, that's not your authentic self. And give her permission to be her authentic self. And that's all we're doing in teacher training. How can you take your authentic self, even when it looks a hot mess, and feel safe? The problem is, for a lot of black and brown bodies, there's not a lot of places in which we feel safe. I, in any given day, struggle with if I need to code switch for whomever I'm sitting in front of. I tell people all the time, I'm bilingual. I don't know I can't speak, Hindu, or any of those things, but I can code switch with the best of them. And I don't want to be that. That is not my authentic self. And so, whoever that is, let's start being truthful about that. I don't know all the things. My cohort in crime and yoga world is a woman named Marissa. And Marissa is my all things anti-racist, beat yourself down, beat people down sister. For me, I'm like, well, maybe we could give them another chance. And she's like, nope, they gotta go. Right? But like, we need all of that. And people need permission to just be themselves. One of the struggles I had when I taught at a leading studio in the area is that I had to say and be certain things and couldn't say or be certain ways. That's not what the yoga is supposed to lead us into. Yoga is supposed to bring us into our Lord, I lost the word. See there? There's authenticity. See, now there it goes. Into our authenticity. But many places don't want you to be that.
I think you're talking about equity too.
Oh,
Because I think
that's, yeah.
because I think some people have more permission to be their most authentic self than others.
Yeah.
And so that balance is important. About some people giving space for other people who have not had that space to be their most authentic selves. To
Absolutely.
actually do it. And I think that that's what you're talking about.
Absolutely. When after Daniel Prude was murdered, and we were at the protest, people needed to be able to be themselves in those moments and to grieve and lament and to keen. And my authentic self was to take off my shoes and say, okay, where can we find space to breathe in between the keening so that we don't lose ourselves?
I think that's a good place to end it.
Ashe.
You have to have the space to breathe.
Ashe. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank y'all. Good thing.